I use that I shouldn't.
Writing advice out there. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to look at a lot of that advice and wrestle with it and figure out what kernels of truth can we extract, and also where is it just plain wrong. We're going to start with some advice that you've heard before, and then we're going to get to some advice that is so
Hey,
wildly out there.
Callie, how's it going? It's been a while. You always popping in at the end of the stream. Good to see you, Callie.
You won't even believe it.
But
We're
good for
gonna
you,
start with some writing
Callie.
advice from Reddit, where someone asked
Reddit
for the
advice.
worst writing advice you've ever received. So someone was writing a YA fantasy set in medieval times, and they said someone gave them the advice to have a lot more, how shall we say this, Congress without consent. I mean, for one, this is YA, so like, are you really sure like that's what this book needs a lot more of? But someone responds like, actually, if you're writing in medieval times, to be really realistic, you need a lot of diarrhea. I mean, this is a time without any sanitation or antibiotics. But somehow when I think of a great fantasy series like, I don't know, J.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, you don't see the hobbits crapping behind bushes every other scene. So what is the actual writing advice that's being given here? It is, be more realistic. Okay, why is that such bad advice? Well, maybe you are writing a non-realistic book, right? I mean, fantasies can be very fantastical. Even romance a lot of time is basically a fantasy. You have to know the audience for your book and have to know whether they're going to want strict realism or whether you can bend the rules a little bit and include more
grounded but still
characters
fantastic
and situations. Now, I have to say that some of the time, be more realistic is good advice, but for a lot
be completely unrealistic. I mean, it works totally fine, Callie. Your story is fucking beautiful. So you hit that one dead on the head with that.
of genres out there and a lot of books you might be writing, it's terrible advice. And by the way, as we're talking about all these sorts of mistakes, I talk a lot more about how to avoid common mistakes in my book Fox Academy, which is more than 250 videos on all sorts of topics, from writing sentences to writing your novel, and it really helps authors get across the finish line, finish their book, and publish it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to check that out. The next bad writing advice that we're looking at is from two authors you probably have heard of. Brandon Sanderson and Tim Hickson of Hello Future Me made a video about terrible writing advice that they've heard.
You need to make your characters likable.
They don't have to be likable, but that's advice you hear all the time. It's like, oh, your character isn't likable enough. No one's going to read your book. And what Brandon Sanderson points out a little bit later on in the video is that likability is really only one metric you should look at when considering whether a character is good enough. They don't have to be likable, but if they're not likable, then they should be, say, relatable. A relatable character might not be likable. They might have serious moral flaws, like, say, Philip Marlowe in the Raymond Chandler novels, right? I mean, he's an alcoholic. He turns to drink to solve his problems a lot of the time. Doesn't make him super likable? Well, no. But does it make him relatable? For a lot of us, yes. Now, you might be writing a character who isn't super likable, and maybe they aren't relatable either, but I think there's a third category you should consider, and that is, are they interesting? In Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, the judge is not a likable character. He's not especially a relatable character, being like 7 foot tall and having no hair and going out and scalping Indians all over the Midwest. But he is a very, very interesting character with this desire to destroy everything he cannot control. There is no other character like him in all of literature, other than maybe like Iago or Satan or something. So I agree with Brandon Sanderson and Tim Hickson on this one. Characters definitely do not have to be likable, but if they're not likable, they should be relatable or interesting. For this next installment of terrible writing advice, let's swing on over to Quora, where someone asked, what is terrible writing advice that you thought was good? And one of the people that answered was Janet Fitch, who's a wonderful author. She wrote White Oleander along with many other books, and I studied under her at USC. She said that she once got this writing advice to know your theme before you start writing. Essentially, she's saying like, listen, you have to have it all planned out and all thought out before you even start writing that first paragraph. And she says like, that's not her process at all. Like, the first draft is much more
I have so many themes in my book, I don't know what the fucking main theme is. The main theme is like the duality of existence. How vague and fucked up that is, yeah, there's not really much else to say with it. It's just the duality of existence.
Exploratory, just figuring out the boundaries, figuring out like what this book is even about. And then in the second draft and third draft and fourth draft and 10th draft, that's where she actually figures out like, oh, here's my theme. Like, here's what I actually want to say. This is bad writing advice that puts way too much pressure on that first draft and upon writers, because sometimes they end up just working so much hard on research and all the back end stuff and don't end up writing the book.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, I don't know enough yet to write the book. No, no, no. Just
Alright, I spent 20 minutes writing the worst story I possibly could think up to try to gain attention for my other writing. If you're reading stories, I'd like to see if it's a good level of bad or not. Oh, so it's just a place. It's just an archive. Archive of our own. You can write stories in it and submit for any user to read. But what's different about AO3 is that it can be as explicit as can be. So there's basically no filtering. So I could put Nepotism Unleashed on there. Gooning and edging isn't explicit. It's more like the Sith Lords versus Jedi. Yeah, I totally got that, Beezus. And it's like, it doesn't actually state anything explicit. Only if you know, you know. If you don't know what those words are, you would think they were just made up words that were just like thrown in to like, you know, like the Force or whatever, right? I love that he turns his edge towards him. That was fucking beautiful. Humor is just subverting expectations, man. And you subverted all the expectations.
write the book. You can always fix it up later. And if you want a little bit deeper discussion on this, watch my video on 9 beginning mistakes that writers make about theme. The next absolutely terrible writing advice that we're looking at comes from Medium, where Emily Schultz wrote a post called "The Worst Writing Advice Ever." She said that the absolute worst writing advice is the phrase, "kill your darlings." Kill your darlings is a phrase attributed to William Faulkner, but actually it comes from Arthur Quiller Couch. Kill your darlings just means when you really, really like something in a story, you should probably cut it. And it's just this attitude of being an absolute savage when it comes to editing your own work. Now, she says this is terrible writing advice because what you like in your book should not be treated as suspect just because you like it. Like, maybe you like it because it actually is good.
Yeah, that's why it's like when I get to those sayings and stuff like that, I'm like, I don't want to get rid of this. I don't care if it's bad or not. I like it. And if someone really tells me it's really that bad, alright, I'll get rid of it. You can just go in AO3 and search up straight furry porn. Like pictures or just like writings? Because of course there's gonna be furry porn on there. 100%. Damn. Well, it is what it is, right?
Good. And she points out that the actual debate is not whether we...
There's 90% horny lesbians now. So I should put a lot of Fuda mommy dommy, like bondage type stuff on there, right, Beezus? They love that shit? It's mainly what I read in there. Actually, good stories on there. A lot of detail. Goonable, too. Damn, Muffin!
like a passage in our work or not, but does it serve the story? So I think she's right that this phrase gets misinterpreted way too often, and authors use it to end up deleting things in their manuscript that they really should keep. Hopefully you have good judgment as an author, and you can tell what is working in a story and what's not working in a story.
That's why I ask other people, and if no one like sits up and just says, no, that's fucking retarded, get rid of it, then I'm keeping it.
What Kill Your Darling really means is, listen, if something's not working in a story, even if you really, really like that scene, you gotta delete it. For the fifth absolutely terrible piece of writing advice, we're going to go to Nathan Branford's blog. He is...
Let me get back to stream. Pick a number from 1 to 10. 27. Did I win? Guys, did I win? Fuck you, Muffin. Fine, 7. Fuck. Just make it too complicated. You're making it too complicated, Muffin.
Is a former literary agent. He also wrote How to Write a Novel, and he is the author of the MG series Jacob Wonderbar.
Of course,
and he
it's
just
7.
asked this question on his blog, like, hey,
7 for the
what
win.
is the worst writing advice you've ever received? And honestly, I
always
can't
7.
believe what people left in the comments. I mean, they just came out of the woodwork and shared stuff that is truly wild. And one of the wild things came from Karen, not a Karen, but her name is Karen. And she said that an English teacher told her happy endings are easy, unsatisfying, and unrealistic. Jeez, I mean, I'm sorry that your dog and your mom died on the same day, but maybe take some time to mourn and don't be giving out writing advice. There is absolutely nothing wrong with a happy ending. I think what this writing advice could be altered to say is you have to do the work to make sure your happy ending is believable and doesn't come off as cheesy. That's a much more nuanced version that you could actually like extract a grain of truth from. Now the question is, how do you do that? Well, I was watching a show in the Yellowstone universe, and I'm not gonna say which one because I don't want to spoil it, because I'm gonna talk about the ending right here. And in this show, they have 2 storylines. They have a romantic storyline, and they also have defending the Yellowstone Ranch storyline. Now, one of those storylines ends in a horrible tragedy, and the other one ends in just wild success. So I ask you, does that count as a sad ending or a happy ending? Well, it's kind of both, right? If you have multiple plot lines in your story and you want to avoid seeming too cheesy, have 2/3 of them end happy and then have 1 end sad. That will make it feel realistic, it'll make sure it doesn't feel cheesy, and it will keep you from bearing the brunt of terribly misguided English teacher advice. Now for this 6th piece of terrible writing advice, we're going to Writer's Digest, where Adam Sternberg wrote a post saying he knows exactly what the worst writing advice of all time is. It is write what you know. I think the most surefire way to sort of deconstruct this writing advice is to point out the fact that sometimes you don't know what you know. Deep, I know. And here's how Adam explains this point. He says that he used to work in New York media, so therefore he wrote a novel about New York media. And then he's like, it was terrible. So instead, he turned to write a near-future New York dystopian novel about a garbage collector turned hitman who targets the daughter of a famous evangelist. That turned into his novel, Shovel Ready. But through this process, he learned, like, wait a second, I didn't know this, but I know a lot about these topics. He knew a lot about hard-boiled stories. He knew a lot about the social dynamics of New York City, and he also knew a lot about religious mythology. So the process of writing a novel was him discovering what he actually did know. And I think this coincides with what Ursula Le Guin said about this particular piece of writing advice of write what you know. She said, yeah, you can write what you know, but just remember that you know a lot of things like lizards and dragons and countries that don't exist. Maybe those are things that you know, and so you should write about them. For the 7th piece of terrible writing advice, we're going to go to a podcast. And this podcast is called Fantasy Writing for Barbarians. And they have an episode devoted to the terrible writing advice of just write. And what this advice basically means is like, you're overthinking it. Like, just sit down, just get words onto the page. I mean, is there a grain of truth in that? Yes, but I think in general, writing without intention, without education, and without any sort of a plan is a bad idea. I think this advice oversimplifies the process of learning writing. And you need to spend a lot of time learning your craft and learning writing techniques and reading other books and learning from those authors. Now, should you be writing while you're doing all of that knowledge gathering?
Probably.
Well, yes, but just to boil all of that down to like, dude, just write, does a real disservice to writers out there. On the other hand, if you are spending like all of your writing time doing research and you've been doing it for like 6 months or a year or 2 years or something, and you haven't actually gotten to the process of like putting words down on a page, then maybe this is good advice for you. But if that's not your particular problem, in general, this advice might do more harm than good. For this next piece of writing advice, we're going to go to LinkedIn and look at a post by Emily Winsauer. She did a post about the best and worst writing advice that she has ever received. And one of the things she said as the worst writing advice was, people are dumb, so write to a 5th grade level. What is wrong with this one? Well, there's a lot wrong with this one. For starters, I don't think it's a good idea to ever think of your audience as being stupid. I see a lot of
I don't want a stupid audience. I want an intelligent audience that can pick out the nuances and like the small details and comparisons and like infer things through the world based through like a Final Fantasy lens. Pretty much. There doesn't really need to be anything else there, right?
Spell things out way too clearly, and I'm like, trust me, your audience is going.
And if you don't need, it's like the idea of Lord of the Rings. Like, you don't, in order to enjoy the story of the Lord of the Rings, you don't need to know that Gandalf is a Maya, right? You don't need to know that Sauron is a fallen Maiar. You don't need to know who the Valar are. You don't need to know like anything really about the past. You just kind of need to know that Sauron's bad and he made the ring. You don't need to know how the rings were made. You know, it doesn't even really show the other rings because it's just the Nazgul, right? But it's like there's so much you can infer in the background from just like the opening passage kind of idea of like setting the world and where it is right now. And that's kind of like what this dungeon is supposed to do in chapter 1, is set the pace of the world and the understanding of the world as like this is the ultimate challenge that's never been completed.
To get this from the context. You don't need to explain it to them. But what this advice is really focusing on is diction level, right? Should you use simple language that, you know, a 5th grader can understand? Well, on one hand, will that sell more copies of your book? Yes, you have a better chance of selling more copies of your book if you keep the language simple. But I will say that simple language doesn't necessarily mean bad writing. You have to do a lot of work, like, say, Hemingway did, to make sure that those simple words end up adding up to something beautiful and profound. In general, I think you need to have a sense of who your audience is, and then you write to them. That might be people with a 2nd grader vocabulary, or it might be people with a graduate level vocabulary. But another reason why this piece of advice is so bad is because it's assuming you only get one style in all the books that you write.
Yeah.
Which is ludicrous. Look at an author like E.L. Doctorow. In his book Ragtime, it's more of like a 5th grade diction level. There's not a lot of super complex words in it. And then he wrote a book like City of God, which has like so many words that I didn't know. I mean, I was like consulting a thesaurus like almost every page. And guess what? That variety in your writing is perfectly fine. For this 9th piece of terrible advice, we're going to go to writing forums, where one person asked a question of like, what is the most WTF advice that you've ever received as a writer? And someone said that one of their college professors said, you have too many morally gray, contradictory characters in your fiction. And just sidebar here, I think it's funny that there's been both an English teacher who's given terrible advice and a college professor who's given terrible advice. Sometimes teachers can give really bad advice and you have to unravel yourself from it and unlearn it before you can become a better writer. And I say this as someone who taught college for a decade as well. So let's talk about contradictory characters for a moment. Contradictions are not a mistake in fiction. They might be a mistake in logic, they might be a mistake in science. They are not a mistake in fiction. They introduce a complexity in your fiction that you want. Why? Because people are often contradictory. They often say one thing and do another. They often think one thing and then act against their interests. If you want to mirror the complexity of real human beings, you should absolutely make your characters contradictory. But let's also address the other thing that he said, is that the characters are morally gray. Now, there's a lot of genres out there with very clearly demarcated lines between good and evil. Like a good percentage of the Marvel universe feels very much this way. But even in the DC universe, you get a character like Batman, who starts to get a little morally gray in places. But just speaking personally, I find morally gray characters absolutely fascinating, and I definitely want to read more of them. Now, if someone absolutely can't tell, like, who to like and who to dislike, yes, that can be a problem in your fiction. Like, if absolutely everyone is morally gray, who are we really cheering for? Okay, I could actually get behind that critique. But in general, morally gray and contradictory characters are rich characters that will fuel your story. For the 10th mistake, I actually debated whether I should include this one, and I thought, you know, it is genuinely terrible advice, so I'm just gonna throw it in here. This is from Richard Thomas at Lit Reactor, and he said that his MA thesis advisor, Dale Ray Phillips, told him to leave the slow reveal to the strippers. Okay, first of all, that is cringy writing advice for a number of reasons. But let's just talk about the content of what he's saying. I mean, he's saying don't have a slow reveal? I feel like the history of literature is about slow reveals over the course of an entire novel. Now, maybe he was saying, oh, your pacing is off, like the middle part, it stops being slow and grinds to a halt. okay, that can be a problem. But if you have a decent, slow reveal over the course of a whole chapter or a whole novel, that is the essence of good writing. You can name a million books that take the entire story to slowly reveal some sort of secret or mystery. That's a good storytelling device. For our 11th mistake, we're going to look at dripping quills, the worst writing advice you've received. In this forum, someone said they were told that your writing is terrible, you should stop coming up with ideas, stop procrastinating, and just do something with your life. But then look at who this was attributed to. Oh, it's her. Sometimes the worst writing advice that we hear comes from ourselves. We have these dark thoughts in our head like, you should just give up. You're never gonna amount to anything. It reminds me of that Scooby-Doo mask reveal
Never stop, never give up, never surrender.
Who's been keeping me from writing? And then they
it's
take
yourself.
the mask off the other person and it's like, oh, it's me. Listen, do not give bad writing advice to yourself. You are the most important advice giver to yourself. So don't mess it up. Don't be negative. Don't be down on yourself. Give yourself the advice that you can do this. I'm going to end with a piece of advice from Toby Litt's Substack, where he's talking about bad writing advice, and then he ends with this gem. The ability to ignore all advice and even common sense and just barrel onwards, that is the best advice. All right, everybody, please comment below with what you found to be the absolute worst advice in this video, and make sure to like and subscribe. Happy writing.
True.